Most brokers don't fail due to a lack of talent. They fail because they spend months, years chasing deals that have no shot in actually closing. In this video, I will break down how to spot a dead deal project from a mile away, and I'll walk you through how to identify a true paycheck, a deal that has a high probability of getting you paid. And this mindset shift is extremely important. You have to identify the difference between the two. Project versus paycheck, and it will save you time, and most importantly, it will help you earn tens of thousands of dollars, if not more, this year alone. Keep watching. We've all been here before. Think about it. A year one agent, new to the business, thrilled to have a conversation with an owner, and they finally say, yes, I'm ready to sell. You sit down with the owner, you go through the proper process of first identifying what the property is actually worth. So you work out everything from their income, you understand the top line revenue, you have all their financials that have been provided, so you understand the operating expenses. You've arrived at an NOI, you agree on that step so far, and here, the time in which you discuss the value of the asset. You believe the property based in today's market and appropriate underwriting assumptions that can be defended. Most importantly, you arrive at a value of $4 million for this building. Seller, of course, after walking through the same exact numbers, the same rent roll, the same financials, the same historicals, the same operating expenses, agreeing to the same net operating income, seller wants $5 million. We've all been there before. What do you do? For a new advisor or a new agent, it's easy to get excited about the opportunity of listing this property. So it's easy to sometimes ignore the simple fact that you are way off of value, and there's no way in the world that any sound buyer, credible buyer, with the capacity to close will come anywhere close to $5 million. This is the point in which you have to make a decision. Seller says, I'm ready to list it. I'll list it at 5. Other people have told me that it's worth $5 million. And now you have to make a decision. Do you buy the listing knowing darn well there's no way this deal will trade for anything more than 4? Or do you simply accept the fact that you're going to be working on a project for the next 6, 9, or maybe more months? And just like that, you're stuck with a project. An overpriced listing, a deal that's worth no more than $4 million, but here you are marketing an asset for $5 million. We've all been there before, but here's the challenge. If you don't understand how to readjust that filter and actually identify the difference between a project, which is what you have, an overpriced listing, and a properly priced listing that you can actually sell and therefore earn a commission, you'll spin your wheels forever. So let's define the difference between a project and a paycheck. A paycheck is where, as an advisor, as an agent, as a fiduciary, you actually take the time to build credibility, build a rapport with an owner of real estate. You go through the proper process of assessing and uncovering their needs, their motivation, their goals. So you understand the two parts of every deal, the person and the property. Once you understand the person, you can therefore identify what type of drivers and what are the things that are most important for that client in working with them to achieve a certain outcome. Therein lies their motivation. If you can properly identify their motivation, and there's 4 reasons why an investment real estate would decide to sell. There's a problem, they're looking to achieve a certain price, they have an opportunity, or there's some form of a change that they are experiencing, such as a lifestyle change, relocation, retirement, a transition. Something is happening in their business and in their life that would warrant and that would drive them to make a decision. Thinking about the problems that one might occur are things such as a loan maturing, so a debt maturity, problems with the property from a physical standpoint, maintenance that needs to be done. Maybe there is an increase in supply, so all around their asset, new construction is being delivered and they are now competing with newer and superior product. There's a lot of different problems that one can experience. Management issues, high vacancy, crime. These are all things that are truly drivers that would encourage and inspire someone to make a decision to possibly sell their property. Secondly, opportunity. There might be another opportunity that the owner believes is a better alternative than owning their asset. That could be inside of real estate or outside of real estate. And that's important to note, that sometimes the opportunity may not be to go buy another building. Maybe they're looking to acquire an existing company or an operating business. These are all things that might be drivers to them making a decision to sell, and therefore look to hire you to sell the assets so they can therefore get liquidity to pursue whatever's next, whatever that opportunity is. Let's talk about price. Price is definitely a driving factor as to why someone might sell their building. But if getting a certain price, and let's just say they bought the building for $2 million, and they're set on selling only if they can achieve a sales price of $4 million and net proceeds that after all fees might get them somewhere around $2 million in sale proceeds. If the price is the only reason, the only factor that they would actually move forward with that sale, while that's a motivating factor, it's not the strongest or the most high probability reason that someone would sell the building. So you have to look at the motivating factors, the drivers for that decision, but also weigh the probability of why one would actually continue forward and proceed with the sale. And the fourth factor, last but not least, is lifestyle change or some form of a change that owner is going through in their life. It could be a transition, a retirement, a relocation. It might be something as simple as they are moving out of their current location and it no longer makes sense or is no longer feasible for them to self-manage a 20-unit building if they're moving across country. These are all reasons that you have to uncover during the relationship and rapport phase to truly understand and assess if you have a project or if you have a paycheck. Let's talk about the projects. Projects are exactly that. A project is where you know for a fact that there is a greater than 15%, sometimes 20% delta between the owner's price expectation and what you believe to be a properly underwritten value that the market will respond to favorably. And let's just be clear. What does that mean? For a 20-unit asset in your market that was built in 1970, that have average in-place rents that are maybe 10% below the market potential. Maybe there's some deferred maintenance. Let's just call it a classic value add deal. A value add deal that you can add value in terms of operational efficiency. Maybe there's some vacancy. Of the 20 units, there are 5 vacant units, so you have room for physical occupancy improvement. Let's just say there's some bad debt and there's some collections. So there's a little bit of work that has to be done for someone to unlock and realize that value. Let's just say there's some physical improvements to the units that need to be done. So physical repairs, cosmetic renovations that could take those rents from a current average in place from say $900 for 1 bedrooms to say $1,100. This is a classic bread and butter private capital value add deal. With that profile of a business plan, most buyers will look to achieve a certain yield. What I mean by that is, if they were to acquire that property, do the heavy lifting, go through the process of actually executing that business plan, they would likely want to return and get a greater than 15% return on that effort, or therefore on that capital. So a 15% year one cash on cash return is probably about the floor, if not somewhere around the average expected return for that profile of an asset. There's inherent risk that comes along with executing that business plan. Your rehab budget might go over, it might take you longer to stabilize the property. Maybe your pro forma rents are a goal, but yet not yet achievable. Therefore, all your numbers are slightly at risk of not being achieved. Therein lies the yield expectation that a buyer has for that type of project. So when you think about what's a project versus a paycheck, and that's just one example, there's several other indicators that buyers might seek to achieve and hit as targets when they're looking at an opportunity. Levered IRR is another one. For an older vintage product, they might be looking for a 15, 17, 18% levered internal rate of return over a 5 or 7 year hold period. Equity multiple is another one. How much can they double or grow their initial equity that they place into a deal? These are all constraints that if you're dialed into your market, you know exactly what a buyer is looking to achieve, and you know that there's a certain range of value that is a constraint and limitation to how much one can pay for a certain property. Your understanding of the local market is your best data point for if you have a project or a paycheck. That's what you're going to use as your guide to understand if you're priced appropriately or if you're priced outside of that window of acceptable range for a buyer to actually move forward and be excited about that asset. So your ability to filter between a paycheck, which is a deal that's aligned The seller has motivation that's clear, is priced appropriately, you are in line with market comparables from sales comparables and rent comparables, and you are priced at a point to where the typical buyer is in that range of acceptable yield. That is a paycheck. A project is the complete opposite, where there is a disconnect between pricing between seller and the market expectation, where you don't have a clear expectation of what the seller is actually looking to accomplish or achieve through the sale of that property, where questionable if the business plan is solid and is defendable, where your underwriting is so aggressive that most buyers will probably push back on some of your assumptions, and also the time frame in which you have to sell the deal. Is the seller willing to counter offers? Is the seller willing to give you time to form a marketplace, or is there expectation that you hit their price, which is aggressive, in a very short window of time? These are all considerations that you have to factor in to actually understand and assess if you have a project versus a paycheck. Brokers get stuck on projects for several reasons. Number one, they're just excited and happy to be here. They have no clue what they're doing, but they're just so excited to have a listing that excitement trumps the reality that they have a deal that will never sell. Number two, their pipeline is so small and thin that they have no choice but to work on projects versus paychecks because they haven't prospected enough to have other options and other alternatives. So they naturally gravitate to whatever they have in their pipeline versus having a robust pipeline in which they can actually assess what is probable, what's likely, and what will yield paychecks versus spinning their wheels on projects. And number three, they haven't actually been taught the fundamentals on how to assess the difference between a project and paycheck. They simply don't know. They're simply so young in the business that no one has walked them through, either through their own experience or helping them see in real time the things that create opportunity and that put them in a project position versus a paycheck position. Those are three reasons why brokers, especially those without mentorship or without proper training, will often list deals that have zero chance of selling because they're so excited to have an opportunity. They don't yet know that they're going to waste their time because they're working on projects versus paychecks. Oftentimes, agents think that having listings gives them credibility. And the reality of it is, credibility comes from closing. And it's very difficult to close deals if you price them inaccurately to begin with, and you don't identify these as projects versus paychecks up front. Your credibility comes from closing, and assessing probability is the first step in getting to the closing table. If you're not sure if a seller is real, or if you're working on a project versus a paycheck, here's a 3-step filter to help you identify if you have a motivated seller or if you have a project that's unlikely to close. Number one, go back to the early conversations with that owner. What are the underlying motivating factors and the reasons why they actually need to or want to sell? If you can't identify clearly in 2 or 3 bullet points why this owner is considering a sale, why a sale makes sense financially for that owner, or what their plan is with the proceeds, you probably haven't done enough work on building rapport with the owner to understand exactly why you're even here to begin with. Number two, is their price expectation or their expectation of value within 10 or 15% of where you are? So it's not unusual that the owner will have an expectation of value that's higher than yours. You're a trained advisor. You spend all day understanding the market, the drivers of that market, the sales comparables, the market dynamics, the capital market environment. You are the expert. So it's not uncommon that an owner will have an expectation that's higher than your valuation. However, if they're not within 10, maybe 15% of your initial valuation, your true honest valuation, that's a delta that may be very difficult to bridge with the market response to that listing. Ultimately, if you have a seller that's motivated and they're within the 10% range of value, typically your process, and we'll get to that in a moment, should be able to bridge that gap because you can create a competitive marketplace that shows where the market values the asset. But if they're bottom line and they're dead set on a number that's 15, 20, 30% higher than what you believe it's worth, that's a very difficult starting point is worth. Number three, do you have their commitment to counter every single offer that's presented? And I understand there are always going to be lowball offers, so you have to prepare that owner for that reality up front. As a broker, we don't set the price. Our process is what drives competition and therefore creates leverage for that seller and that owner to negotiate. But part of that negotiation requires participation. And if they cannot commit to countering every single offer that's presented, that's a sign that you might be barking up the tree of a project, not a paycheck. So to recap, the 3 filters are: number 1, properly assessing their motivation, understanding why it makes sense for them to consider a sale and what they'll do with the proceeds. Number 2 is their expectation of value somewhere in the ballpark of what you think the property is worth. If it's at or around 10%, maybe even 15%, you have a shot. If it's greater than 15%, there's really no way in the world that if they're hard set on a certain number and you're 15% apart, that you actually will have a deal that's sellable. And then number 3, are they willing to counter every single offer that's presented? Their willingness or lack thereof is a great indicator if you have a seller that's actually motivated and willing to go through the process, or if you're working with a seller who has you on a escapade to do a project with no future of a paycheck in sight. If the answer isn't yes to all 3, detach and go back to building opportunities and pipeline of high probability opportunities, not projects. This week, if you've been following Summer Madness, it's all about harvest. And this is the time to harvest the opportunities that you have built and developed in your pipeline over the years. Go back to your warm leads, those opportunities that you've done BOVs for within the last 24 months. Re-engage those owners in conversation. Maybe you missed a few steps. Maybe you presented value before you actually understood the motivating factors that might cause that owner to sell. So maybe you go back and represent value once you now better understand their motivations and you have something to connect that process to in terms of gauging the probability of their desire to sell and why it makes sense. Engage every single conversation that you have as a warm relationship and get back in front of that owner. FaceTime is always important because the timing of these opportunities oftentimes will impact their idea and their perception of value, as well as their willingness to comply with the process and steps that we laid out before, which is to have alignment of value, to counter every single offer, to actually understand why selling might make sense. But I encourage you to go back to the drawing board in terms of prospecting, because if you don't have high probability opportunities in your pipeline and they're full of simply projects, the best thing you can do to your business and in your business to save time is to go create more high probability opportunities that actually can result in paychecks. The paycheck mindset shift is critical. Oftentimes we look at our progress as a newer advisor based on the number of listings that we have. We want to show everyone that we're extremely active. But the reality of it is you can be active and busy, but not profitable. So the shift here is key. Instead of measuring your success as a year 1 or year 2 advisor with the number of listings that you have, think about the number of high probability potential closings that you have. That mindset shift will help you filter the opportunities that hit your desk. Time is your only asset, especially when you're starting out. So if you can remove and eliminate all the time wasted by chasing projects and simply focus on the paychecks, that there alone will save you time, energy, and more importantly, accelerate your earning potential. So the shift that's important for all of us to make at some point in your career is to focus on the high probability opportunities versus the projects that will drain your bandwidth, your time, and effectively damage your credibility. So here's your project for this week. Take an inventory and audit all of your active listings. Audit your recently presented BOVs and put them in 2 categories: project and paycheck. For those opportunities that have been categorized as projects, go back and see if you can get realignment and re-engage the owners. See if there might be an opportunity to make adjustments on pricing. They're not gone forever. It just requires more work. Go back and pull fresh rent and sales comps. Go back to your underwriting. Go back and have another honest conversation with the owner. And if a price adjustment is warranted, have that conversation. There's only 2 reasons a deal doesn't sell: price and marketing. If you've been marketing and you're doing your job, you have to then demonstrate that price is the only reason why the traction has not been gained on that assignment. So for the projects, go back and reprice, re-engage. On the paychecks, continue to execute the plan, because that momentum from a successful listing that results in a paycheck can be levered into more conversations and more opportunities. But also take that time for those projects that just have no shot in going anywhere. Cut your losses, go back and repurpose and reallocate that time into prospecting and identifying more high probability opportunities that actually have a chance at becoming paychecks. If you like my list and my checklist of probability brokerage and all the things that you can identify as paychecks versus projects, like, comment, and share, and message me below. I'll be sure to share that guide with you on how to identify a high probability opportunity and cut the projects.